leaders of the world. Welcome to Spread Love in Organizations, a podcast for purpose-driven healthcare leaders striving to make life better around the world by leading their teams with genuine care, servant leadership, and love. I'm Naji, your host for this episode from our new series focused on us as leaders. I'm so excited to be joined by one of the best career coaches I've ever met, Gayle Grader. Gayle is an executive career coach and the director of executive career development for MIT Sloan. She oversees the executive career development team and is responsible for setting the programming strategy, delivering career education workshops, and providing one-on-one executive coaching. Before joining Sloan, she spent 13 years as a strategy consultant and business coach working with wide-ranging companies from Fortune 500 to startups. In her early career, Gayle worked in consulting, investment banking, asset management, and executive search. She has a passion for understanding leadership and how great leaders become the people they are. She can be frequently found reading historical and contemporary biographies, building up her perspective on what causes some to become those great leaders who go down in history books. I've been privileged to learn and be coached by Gayle. I can't wait for her to share in the next minutes with all of you her insights and words of wisdom for all of us leaders of the 21st century. Gayle, I'm thrilled to have you with me today.
Thank you, Naji. This is a true privilege to be on your podcast.
Before going and discussing all the leadership from others, you have read so many biographies. Will we have the pleasure to get a small piece of yours and learn more about your personal story and journey?
What a great way to ask that question. Yes. I would love to give you a little bit of context where I have come from and why I do what I do today. So my story begins as being one of 8 adopted kids in a family of parents who immigrated from Ireland to Canada. And why do I start there? I start there because at the time when we were adopted, so the 60s, there weren't families like ours. My parents literally adopted 2 kids at a time. I think of it almost like Noah's Ark, 2 at a time, a boy and a girl. And we represented 2 countries and probably really diverse genetic backgrounds. And my parents were older. And so as a result of this unique family, being immigrants, being adopted, we were always the outsiders, or at least I perceived the outsiders because we were so different in the world. And I think because of that, it's that idea of like, you can be the outsider and look in. And I think that experience has been foundational to who I am today, and quite frankly, to what I do today. And so not only were we a product of this mix of adopted kids with older immigrant parents, we also moved at an interesting time. So we moved from Canada to the United States when I was 11 and a half. And I think when you move cultures, and some people would say there's no difference between Canada and the US, but quite frankly, there's a lot of difference. In fact, when I grew up, I was much more oriented towards the UK than I was to the US. So we moved at a time when I was really in my formative years. And again, that outsider, feeling that outsider position became a part of who I was. And through the course of my primary and secondary education, I actually attended 5 different schools. I think it was 5, maybe 6. And that also gave me that perspective. And why does that matter? Because I think when you are that person who is the outsider, you learn a skill, and that's the skill of observation. And that curiosity in people and in societies, and that interest in really learning how to navigate. And so I think that skill has carried forward, and it's a skill I lean into all the time. And it allows me to calibrate both at a broader level, but then when I drill down into the individual, I use it all the time because I use it in a way to listen and hear and learn. So my background is really where I come from, a huge part of what I do today. And my father specifically, so my family was just really interesting, but my father, who was a physician like you, he was a general practitioner. One of the things that he would do, he would come home and he would tell the stories of the characters in his practice. And my father, who was very much a quiet leader, when he would tell these stories, we would all listen. And he wouldn't really necessarily talk about, the health problems of the people that he delivered care to. He would actually talk about their stories, their family stories. And I love this. And I think his storytelling contributed to my interest in people. And then when I went to college, I was one of those people who didn't know what I wanted to do. I started out thinking I wanted to do medicine, but learned very quickly that wasn't going to be my path. And I encountered a course, actually it was a course, an American Studies course called Work in America. And it was in this course where I finally got exposed to this idea of optionality in the world of work. When you grow up in an immigrant's home and when your parents are Irish and your father is a doctor, the kinds of opportunities that you are taught to consider are really limited. And I know a lot of people out there are brought up in homes where the ideas, what you want to do in the world, are limited. But I took this course and I read a book written by a guy named Studd Terkel. And it was called Working. And it essentially is a book with 36 interviews of people. And it was like a first-person experience of their journeys and their career choices. And these weren't necessarily highfalutin careers. But it made me realize that we actually have a lot of choice in what we do. And so that was the first time I got curious about this world of work and careers. And then later I took another course, which I was exposed to the idea of personality tests. And in fact, did a paper with one of my peers where we did primary research. And I became aware of the utility of these tools as companies considered and assessed their talent. So that experience with those courses, and particularly with that book, launched a curiosity. But I didn't really start engaging with the world of career coaching and coaching until I found myself in 2005, after ramping back on from a career hiatus. I found myself actually having a conversation with a friend, and at the same time also going through some coaching with a coach at Tufts where I went. I actually went to a career coach, and between that experience of working with her and an experience talking to a friend, they both made me realize that this was something I had reflected and said, I'd love to do something with this. Whatever this individual was doing with me, I found fascinating. And then a friend of mine told me that what I was already doing with him was coaching. And so really it was through a combination of happenstance and people actually giving me awareness that I ended up doing what I was doing. And so for a long time, for 13 years, I parallel processed these two universes of both coaching, career coaching, and separately doing business strategy work, market strategy work. But it came to a point where I realized I wanted to merge my interest into one opportunity. And again, I went back and I had some coaching work. I worked with a coach to help me define what I wanted to do. And I knew that I wanted to really be at this intersection of incredible talent, innovation, and really markets. And so I landed at Sloan. But even before then, there was a moment in 2012, I was flying back from a consulting project, a healthcare consulting project, in fact, where I had been working with two colleagues with some kind of cancer drug. No, actually, at this point, I was working with a portfolio of contraception drugs. And I was flying back, and at this point, I had worked with teams across the world, and for one company, but seeing the profound differences in how each one of these country teams operated. And I remember turning to my colleague and I said, I am going to do executive coaching because the differences in leadership styles are directly impacting the performances of the teams and therefore the performances of the portfolios. So the idea of what I wanted to do and where I am today really was an amalgamation of these specific moments and specific interactions and an awareness that I came into. And so today I am blessed and privileged to work with incredible talent. And I believe that my life's purpose and where I believe I bring impact and scale is helping this talent unleash themselves and find the context and find the opportunities where they can truly lean into their authentic selves and be able to lead organizations and teams so that they can create the kind of legacy, the kind of economic development where they are changing lives. And for me to be the person behind the scenes that is catalyzing and enabling and supporting other people's journeys and other people's journeys to leadership is really, I think, my life's work now.
Wow. Thank you so much first for sharing your part of your story and the different experiences that brought you to what you do today and how beautifully you framed your purpose. I can attest I've been so lucky to be working with you, to have you as my coach, and truly what you're doing, obviously you're saying behind the scenes, but I think it's a lot of times being in front of the scene, helping us be better as leaders and human beings for our people and our purposes. Thank you, Gayle. Jumping on all, the experiences, this passion you have now for leadership, I know you read a lot and you read biographies. You're passionate about stories. As you said, your father used to read stories also about people and families. What have you found the most important leadership trait, or if there's any common thread, from all the great leaders that you have read about or that you have been coaching in the last years?
That is a really tough question to answer because leaders and leadership shows up in so many ways. But I will say one of the big commonalities that I see, and I have had the opportunity to coach people across so many different disciplines, so many different role types, so many different stages in their careers. But one of the commonalities that I think really leads to great leadership is fully engaging with who you are authentically, being honest, accepting both the peaks and the valleys of your journey, and using those peaks and valleys as a lens to explore who you are, perhaps see how you have changed, to discover the values that you have, and then put that all together to create the mantle that allows you to be your best leader.
And from there, I would love to hear who's your greatest leader from the history, if you want to say. I don't know if you want to go into the recent word, you can too, but from all those leaders. And really, this question is not only about one person, but then from this story, what can we take all as leaders for us to be able to become one of those who are influencing and making the world a better place?
So, no surprise, I have Irish parents. I'm a Canadian. I grew up with British influences. The leader that captured my attention first was Winston Churchill. And why? Well, if you ever have read William Manchester's, he actually wrote 2 volumes out of 3, and a third author ended up finishing the 3rd volume because he had passed away. But this author was able to use his notes to finish. Winston Churchill was a profoundly complex man, and he had incredible peaks and valleys. And if not for World War II, we probably might not remember him today. But what was it about his journey before then that allowed him to be the right person at that moment in history to step up? And when you look back to his early days of his life, even what he did as a child, the way he would take toy soldiers and game out different battle scenes, and then you carry that forward to when he was in the Boer War, and he himself just fearless, like almost not afraid of bullets. He's definitely one of those leaders that made me aware that leadership is something that you don't become a leader just because you want to be a leader. You become a leader sometimes because of the things that are happening and your ability to step up. But it all starts young, in your youth. And so he is definitely one of the first historical leaders that caught my attention. But here's the thing. His story, depending on who has written his story, can be very different. And so depending on where the author sits and the thesis he's trying to portray or she portrays, you can actually have a different experience of a leader's story. I recently just finished a book on Lawrence of Arabia, and he is a leader. Again, I'm drawing from the UK. But if you look at what he contributed to, whether you draw the lines to the positive or draw the lines to the negative, I mean, today you could say urban warfare and similar, the asymmetrical war that we see now that has become a common form of attacking our enemies. It started with him and what he did in the desert in the Middle East. He is a fascinating character. But when you go back to the beginning of his life, you can see where his leadership journey began. And he was a child where he was really considered an illegitimate child because his father didn't marry his mother because she was a mistress. So his story is fascinating. And there are so many more leaders that I've read about, men and women in different times of history and even today. And so what I like to do is see the dots, how they connect, when the journey began, and the story of when someone is young and how they are, what happens in their youth that creates them is fascinating. I often, right now a curiosity of me, and I've seen this through the population that I work with at MIT, a theme that I'm curious about in terms of leadership is females who are not born in the US, who come, in their very late teens, or while they come during the years while they're in their college years, and how they tend to be, some of them turn out to be incredible leaders. We have a whole bunch. I could list, a handful of women that I've worked with at Sloan, who came as young adults and truly are incredible leaders. And how does their status as outsiders, and which obviously I feel alignment to, how does their status as outsiders and not being, burdened by growing up as females in this culture, how does that impact their ability to lead? How does that differentiate them as leaders? So it's not just the historical biographies and some of the historical figures that I think about, but now I think about, people to me who are, maybe you won't read about them or you won't find them in a bookstore or an online bookstore, but they are the leaders today. And who are they and what are those themes? So these are the things that I think about, but really it was started when I became aware of, I liked reading stories about these historical figures and what made them be the people who became.
And again, when you're sharing about those leaders, you mentioned first childhood, right? Some adversity. Also, in your story, you talked about you talked a lot about being an outsider and then being so curious, right, about people and learning more about them. It's every time I think about this idea of, is everything coachable as a leader, right? Can we train to become even better leaders? And some of the things you shared, I want to double click on them, right? Is Winston Churchill born to become a leader? Or is it something that each one of us can get better at? Well, obviously, yeah, a lot of capabilities we can. But what do you think between this part of someone born as versus someone who become, and what goes into play from what you've seen?
That is a fantastic question. So I can tell you this. When you walk in a room or when you're in a room and people walk in, we can all sense who is a leader. And that is a good question. Is someone born that way? Or can you be made? Well, quite frankly, there are all kinds of leadership. And one person can be a leader in one context and not be a leader in another. But to answer your question directly, I'll give you this perspective. My child is an officer in the Marine Corps. I have watched as he has gone from being that candidate, surviving the first few months of, TBS, and then watching him grow into his role. I can tell you that leadership is something that can be trained. And my husband's family are all the result of a military experience, or most of them. Since the 60s, there has been a male in the Marine Corps. And I have a tiny little book that my husband had, actually, from the 80s. And it's something that you can put in your pocket. And it's guidelines on how to be a great leader. And the interesting thing when you read this book, a lot of the principles of coaching are actually captured. And it's an empowerment-based approach to leadership. And I'm actually seeing it with my child as he grows in his leadership signature and his leadership journey. So do I think it can be taught? Yes. But I do think people are born with a certain orientation to the world, a certain ability to communicate. So sometimes there are people who naturally are going to be out front. There are the woos, the people who win people over, and this I'm using Clifton Strength language. There are people who just naturally have strong beliefs and they lead through beliefs. There are people who have a physicality to them, and because of that physicality, and it could be just physical strength or beauty, they have the opportunity to own the room. So leadership comes in every shape and form, and some people have gifts that they can lean into, but ultimately, I think it can be trained and developed. And I've seen that actually through the lens of Sloan. And I think through the work that Sloan does, specifically the faculty, what happens in the classroom is that they are encouraging each individual to find their leadership signature and put them in the place to lead.
I'd love to have you react to a couple of words I'm going to give you. So I will say one word and I'd love your reaction to it with one word or a little bit more as you wish.
Okay.
So obviously the first word we talked a lot about, but I'd love your reaction as an executive who've been helping so many executives. Leadership.
Vision.
What about career?
Journey.
And you know, I want to double click on this one because you talked about optionalities. And I've been discussing, you know, we're a diverse group, for example, even at MIT, as you know, I'm currently there. And about optionalities, my culture, but also a lot of my friends' cultures, also in different parts of the world, we always said like the options we had were becoming a physician, an engineer. For some, it's a lawyer. And we would say like, yeah, after you do these three, maybe you can do something else, right? And you framed it practically in the same way. So I'd love your thoughts about it and how you discovered optionalities through the book working, but any advice you have also for, you know, more advanced people in their career and the switches. I know you help a lot people around us. So yeah, any thoughts about that idea?
So it's fascinating. I grew up the same mindset. It was the lawyer, the doctor, the accountant. It's interesting where you start. Here's a checkpoint. There's something called the ONET. It's a government database. I think at this point, there's more than 1,100, maybe even more, specifically recognized roles in the US. And I know, I call this almost like talent velocity. The kinds of roles that are being created are only increasing, and technology is certainly driving this. So when I think about optionality, I think about it in two ways. One way is that idea of what are specifically recognizable roles. And another way I think about it in terms of optionality, and this is more from the bottom up in the individual, it's about what are, like, helping people try to identify what are those things, those facts, those pieces of information that put together a compelling picture of where they want to go. So it's not necessarily starting with a title or an industry, but it's more about what are the things that you want to engage with, interact with, impact, and then later you find the language and what I call the career coordinates, so that you can land very specifically and strategically. And what I have seen in terms of optionality, whether it's working with executives through Sloan or executives through the private coaching work, it's pretty amazing. Some people stay within their lane, even though they think they have a curiosity and broader optionality. It's almost like they want to continue to affirm what they've been doing. And there are other people who do 180 to 360 turns. And when I say 360, sometimes people step out and they switch and they try something new, and they take almost like an experimental, iterative approach to seeing if this new direction fits, and they find their way back to where they started from. So optionality at the end of the day is really, from my perspective, defined by the individual. And it's how far and wide do you want to go in shifting to try something new as you go on this journey of your career and really of your life.
Yeah, I love it, and how you framed it, right? Like studying what is the impact that you want, what is your personal purpose, and writing it back. Many times, you know, as a leader and coaching others, we always find ways to be attached to one title. And I always challenge the people, like how many times those titles changed. And, you know, in even like the last 5 years, sometimes you have some titles that change organizations and then a new title comes. It's more about what you want to impact, what you want to bring to the word, and then you work it back to how you can do it within your work for it to become, as you said, a life story rather than just a job, and then you have your life. So I love the framing. Any reaction on coaching?
So coaching is amazing. It's an amazing tool. What coaching does, so in the world of coaching, you assume that every single person is creative, resourceful, and the answers are within. What we try to do with our coaching, and it's not just me, it's anyone who's working with executive transitions, is we help you take the noise, find the signals, and finally be able to get focused. Because for many people, particularly when you're a later career, there can be a lot in your head, right? It's complex. There's a lot of things that impact what you might want to do. And it's not just, what you can do individually, but there's other influences. What are the roles that you're supposed to be playing in the world? What are the expectations that you're still living up to? And so what coaching does is, assuming that you have the answers within, we try to create some structure to essentially an unstructured process and allow the individual to see things, to become aware, and take that awareness and turn that awareness into really strategies that allow the individual to land in a way that is, hopefully a very leveraged landing. That's coaching.
The last word I'd love you to react to is spread love in organizations.
I love this. I mean, Naji, when you first told me about this, I could totally relate. I have encountered so many leaders who really are about love. It may show up as empathy, it may show up as empowerment, but at the end of the day, what's driving them is their love truly for humanity, their willingness to see the growth and support the growth of the individuals that they lead. And so, those leaders who really take that approach, you can, particularly if you've done 360 feedback, you can hear it in the people that have worked for them. It's observed by their peers. It is recognized by their leaders and their managers. And the results are amazing because leaders who lead through love create the kind of environment where their teams feel seen, heard, empowered, and supported in their own growth.
Thank you. Any final word of wisdom for all of us leaders around the world?
So I will give this piece of wisdom. What you are doing, Naji, is amazing. Thought leadership is a powerful tool. It's a powerful tool for branding, for impact, for connection, for community. For any of you who are listening, and you have thought leadership, you have a point of view where by getting it out there, it can change lives and change perspective. You should absolutely lean into it. It is powerful. And in this day and age, the reality is thought leadership can become the differentiator, and it can lead you to opportunities and optionality that you might never have expected before. So by doing this with you, I'm also acknowledging that your thought leadership is powerful, and it has become both an incredible tool for you to have a platform for impact, but I think your thought leadership is profoundly important in this world.
Wow, Gayle, I was not at all expecting this. Thank you so much for your kind words, your time, generosity, and this amazing, inspiring discussion. Thank you so much, Gayle.
Thank you, Naji. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all for listening to Spread Love in Organizations podcast. Follow us on LinkedIn and connect with us on SpreadLoveIO.com. We're eager to hear your thoughts and feedback. Most importantly, spread love in your organizations and spread the word around you to inspire others and amplify this movement our world so desperately needs.